I've created this flight especially to navigate through the issues after the 2024 update to Concorde and primarily to help beginners/intermediate Concorde flyers to help in attaining Mach 2 and using the autopilot dealing with many update issues. So here we are flying from Honolulu, Hawaii to San Francisco, California. After the 2024 update, this has many issues. Changes in speed limiters, how the plane reacts a bit violently to autopilot changes unlike pre-update, and also the alarms related to speed and altitude is also different now. All feels like a new upgrade to the Concorde, which technically should not be the case as there's only one Concorde and only one way it works. Make sure to select a flight plan without any breaks. Most importantly, select a runway direction facing the direction of the flight path, so you don't have to manually turn around and then catch the path in the autopilot. If you're generally taking off and close to the magenta flight path, the autopilot will take over correctly. If you see the magenta flight path color disappears in the VFR panel, when you look at the VFR panel after takeoff, then you need to get the plane close enough to the waypoint to get the flight path active again and then activate autopilot. But in this case, I have set the takeoff direction straight to catch the flight path, so no need to turn around. Check the takeoff runway I selected, which puts you straight to the flight path. Otherwise, by default, Honolulu Airport will give you a runway that's opposite to where you have to go, which will force you to turn around.
Tower Speedbird 007 Heavy at runway for right, ready for departure IFR to San Francisco.
Then usually I try to hide the yoke as it's an obstruction and it's in the way. The eye will enable the afterburner for white switches below the throttle, which is necessary for takeoff. Otherwise, you won't have enough runway to take off. Needs all that extra power. Do you know that Concorde is the only plane that uses way more fuel than any other airplane in the world to get from the gate to the runway? Now what I'm pointing here is the two gauges that shows the airspeed in Mach and knots. In the previous version of the Concorde, that is pre-2024 update, the Mach gauge also had a speed limit indicator, the yellowish-orange dotted needle. Now that is not there anymore, which is a bit confusing. But however, I think they made it such a way that you can just focus on the airspeed indicator gauge that is in knots and always keep the speed below it. Okay, first things first, turn on both flight directors. Now we have to set the initial speed and altitude for the autopilot. Now there is a little bug here after the update, where the altitude starts at 500 and then only goes up by 10,000 increment instead of 100. So this is an issue when you need to get to in between altitudes every 10,000 feet. Then you have use altitude acquire and hold back and forth to get where you're supposed to be. Anyways, let's set the altitude to 20,000 or so to begin with.
Honolulu Tower Southwest 29er 63 Heavy, 19er miles west, inbound ILS runway 8 left approach. Southwest 29er 63 Heavy, Honolulu Tower. Altimeter 29er decimal 9er 2, wind calm cleared ILS runway 8 left approach.
Keep your auto throttle off for the entire flight if you ever want to achieve Mach 2. Now let's turn on the afterburners, the 4 white switches below the throttle. Okay, open up the VFR map and make sure all the waypoints are connected and you see the magenta line from the takeoff. This is the magenta line we were talking about. In this flight, we don't have to turn around manually and then activate autopilot. We are facing the same direction, so we can enable autopilot after 1,000 feet or so. Unlike other Boeing or Airbus planes in the Microsoft simulator, I don't think there is a way to enter flight plan manually using the flight management computer. So just have to rely on the flight plan you created on the world map. You can still check the flight plan if you like on the FMC, but you can't edit anything. It's a long flight, usually about 5 hours in a regular commercial plane. But Concorde, if you get to Mach 2 in time, it will take about 2.5 hours. What I'm pointing here is the descend point when you get to San Francisco. It's Heman, and it's about 10.2 miles out from the runway, and that's where you activate the approach.
Giant 8362 heavy wind calm cleared to land runway 8 left. Honolulu Tower Maui, 6 heavy 23 miles west, inbound ILS runway 8 left approach. Maui 6 heavy Honolulu Tower. Altimeter 29.902, wind calm.
Remember,
cleared
reheat
ILS
switches
runway 8
/
left
afterburners
approach.
are on.
Cleared to land runway 8 left, Giant 8362 heavy.
Okay, ready to take off. Parking brakes off. Full throttle. The Concorde will take most of the runway. Pull up around 190 to 200 knots. In the previous version, you have to pull up pretty hard, but after the update, it's a bit better. Either way, you have to pull up a bit harder than other commercial planes. But don't pull up too hard, and you will hit the tail. Good thing the Concorde has a tail, slash gear. Not sure if that won't result in a crash. Okay, we're there. Pull up. Landing gear up, then flaps up. Actually, no real flaps, but the flaps will close the adjustable nose of the Concorde. Okay, time to activate the autopilot. For this, turn both autopilot switches between the two flight director switches and turn the toggle switch left of the airspeed on the autopilot panel from RAD to GPS/INS. Then click on the INS button, which will activate the lateral navigation or the GPS, and then click on the altitude acquire button. Make sure not to turn on the auto throttle. I'm just double checking everything. It might be initially a bit confusing on if the switches are on or off, and clicking them will activate or deactivate them. So sometimes I just try to click slash on click and confirm. Okay, the autopilot has taken effect. Now it's important to keep our speed under control. Keep a keen eye on the airspeed indicator, and your speed doesn't go above the yellow/black limiter needle. If this happens often, then the chances of us getting to Mach 2 will be slim. Then we have to do all sorts of acrobatics ascend/descend to get to Mach 2. So let's be proactive. Also, like I mentioned before, after the update of 2024, the limiter needle is missing on the Mach airspeed indicator. So we have to rely on the knots airspeed indicator.
Friendly 645 descend and maintain 6,000 feet.
We will get the speed close to the limiter as possible, but be aware of your altitude too. The speed limiter is not quite accurate sometimes if your altitude is low, so alarms might go off even if you're below the speed limit. The combination of speed/altitude is key, so keep notes on where we are in terms of altitude and the speed around it at all times, so you can follow the same in your own flights. If you make mistakes, then it will take quite a while to get to Mach 2, which then defeats the whole purpose of flying a Concorde. Usually within 300 to 500 miles, we should be able to achieve Mach 2. Okay, you can see we're very close to the speed limiter. Let's see, just for demonstration purposes, I might try to let it go further than the limiter and show you what happens. Usually when you're at the limiter, then reduce throttle slowly just to keep it below it. Okay, now we're back to the speed limiter. You can see as the altitude increases, the limiter will move further away from 400 knots to 450 and 500. Then we can keep increased speed. One important note is, if you're climbing too fast and already at a higher altitude and cannot get close to the speed limiter, then just hold altitude and then increase speed until you get close to the limiter and then climb again. Okay, you see that alarm? That means we're above the limit of the speed. So let's just throttle down a bit more. Do it very slowly as the Concorde is very sensitive, and if you reduce quickly, you'll lose a lot of speed. One other important thing is that most new pilots here don't understand, including me when I was new to this, is to keep a watchful eye on the temperature of the fuselage of the plane. Concorde, when it flies at Mach 2, its temperature can reach up to 120 degrees Celsius. That is about 250 Fahrenheit. That's a mind-boggling temperature. It's also important not to speed beyond Mach 1.5 at lower altitudes. If you do, the plane's external temperature will rise to over 127 degrees Celsius, and then it's dangerous. Alarms will go off, and if it happens, often it will trigger a crash, especially if your flight difficulty level is set to hard/realistic. Many simulation pilots initially do not understand why this alarm happens, as they don't know where to look or what is happening. I will explain that in a bit. Okay, let's set the altitude to 40,000 feet. Then I'm going to show you the panel that shows the fuselage temperature. Now it's time to keep an eye on it and make sure we're making the right decisions in terms of speed and altitude. So you see this panel with all red and 3 numbers. The top number is the fuselage temperature. The others are external weather. We don't have to worry about the top one is what matters. If you zoom in and read below the top temperature, it will say 127 degrees Celsius, which is the limit. So keep your plane well below it. There is a bug, I think, after the 2024 update. The temperature at Mach 2, even at 60,000 feet, keeps rising to 125 degrees, which is not correct. Usually in the previous version, it never exceeds 112 to 115 degrees when at Mach 2 at 50,000 to 60,000 feet. Currently, the temperature is about 4 degrees. It's hard to fathom that this will rise to 127 degrees, huh? Amazing. No other plane comes close to this. Do you know in Concorde, they have to develop a special engineering for the seats. So when the plane expands almost a foot, due to the heat, the seat bolts won't have issues. So it is on a sliding panel that doesn't get affected by the stretching of the plane due to the high heat. What amazing engineering in 1969. Till this date, we don't have a plane that has engineering this great. Lockheed Martin is developing the Dark Star State Route 72, which they think will go up to Mach 6. They use some sort of special alloy to withstand such temperatures. Okay, we're at Mach 1 and 31,000 altitude, keeping our speed below the limiter. The autopilot is working well following the path. We are very close to the speed limiter. Just adjust throttle to be below it. Since we're climbing, you can see the limiter needle is going up, and we should also catch up with it. So increased throttle is needed. We are a bit above Mach 1, and it's a good idea not to exceed Mach 1 to Mach 1.2 it until we're over 40,000 feet. Okay, the limiter is now moving further. We have to catch up and increase throttle. So what I'm going to do is put the plane level by holding altitude, and then let it speed up, and then we will acquire altitude once we get close to the speed limiter. You can see speed is now increasing quicker as we're not climbing and level now. We're close to 40,000 feet, and we're okay to be around Mach 1.3. I have set the altitude to 60,000 feet now. The ATC will eventually ask us to be at 62,000 feet or so, but that's not possible for us as there's a limit. So we will at that point ask for a decrease in altitude and stay at 60,000. I also use the panel right side to the yoke to keep an eye on the altitude and speed as it's digital and gives a much more clear and accurate picture. Okay, the speed is close to our limiter, so let's now climb again. Push the altitude acquire button so we can keep climbing.
Speedbird 007 Heavy, climb and maintain flight level 510. Climb and maintain flight level 510, Speedbird 007 Heavy.
You can see now the limiter is moving higher as we are above 40,000 feet. This is when we're allowed to climb from Mach 1.2/1.3 to 1.75. Now generally they tell you to turn off afterburner/reheat after 10,000 feet or so, and then turn it back on at Mach 0.95 to Mach 1.75. But if this has some issues after the 2024 update, so if it creates an issue for you turn on and off the reheat, then keep it on all the way until you reach Mach 2.04 at 60,000 feet. I tried it many times, and if I don't keep it on, my speed falls. That is not a good thing above Mach 1, as it would be very difficult to catch up and would cause issues to achieve Mach 2. So keep the reheat on if there's issues.
Speedbird 007 Heavy, contact Honolulu Center.
Okay, we're close the max limiter. But once we reach this point, you don't have to worry about the limiter anymore. You can freely climb without paying any attention, even if your speed is over the limiter. There is not real purpose to watches after this. We have to climb and keep accelerating to Mach 2.
Climbing flight level 510.
Speedbird 007 Heavy, Honolulu Center radar contact. Continue to climb.
We're at Mach 1.66 and climbing now. It's about 70 degrees Celsius now. Keep an eye on the speed and make sure we're climbing steadily. If not at any point, you can hold altitude and level the plane and let it speed. As long as the alarms doesn't go off, you're fine. Only thing is the ATC. They will keep annoying you to climb faster if you stay at a lower altitude for a long time.
Speedbird 007 Heavy, climb and maintain flight level 610.
Climb and maintain flight level 610, Speedbird 007.
You see, the ATC is asking us to climb to 61,000 feet, but we can't do that. Our max setting is 60,000 feet. Even if you manually pitch the plane when you hit altitude hold, it will pull the plane back to 60,000 feet. We will ask ATC later for an altitude decrease. We're climbing well. We're at Mach 1.87 and 52,000 feet. Let's check the temperature of the plane outside. It's 95 degrees Celsius. That's hot. You can also see now we'll quickly climb to 110 and higher. This is a bit of a problem after the 2024 update. Even at 60,000 feet in Mach 2, the temperature sometimes acts very odd and climbs very high. As long as the alarms don't go off, we're fine. You know, Concorde is the only plane that takes an entire flight to finish all the extended checklists. That's why there's another engineer who sits around and checks everything all the time apart from the captain and the co-pilot. Okay, we're getting close. Mach 1.89 and about 56,000 feet. Now we can try and turn off the reheat or afterburners. Let's see if the speed increases steadily or not. If the speed drops, we will keep the afterburners on. Okay, looks like the speed is decreasing, so that's not good. We might have to put the reheat back to on again. Whenever you turn the reheat back on, make sure to apply full throttle again to pull back the throttle a bit back and push forward 100%. Okay, we're increasing speed again, which is good. We're also close to our maximum altitude. Once we level off, then we'll increase speed a bit quickly and reach Mach 2 soon. Okay, looks like we're in altitude hold mode and reached 60,000 feet and leveling out. This is where we hit max cruise and let the speed get to about 2.03 or 2.04, and then put it on auto throttle Mach hold after. If the Mach hold won't work, possibly due to some bug, and won't hold the speed at Mach 2 or higher, then just keep it at max cruise. Now let's see what is going on with our external temperature, and we are within limits. It's a 100 degrees Celsius and looks like it's climbing. Like I said, it takes about 300 to 500 miles to get to Mach 2, maybe sometimes more. ATC is bugging us to get to 61,000 feet, but we cannot. They somehow don't know we're on the Concorde, or maybe don't care. So let's ask for 60,000 feet. So let's ask for 1,000 feet decrease in altitude.
Center speed bird 007 heavy. Request flight level 600.
Speedbird 007 heavy descent and maintain flight level 600.
Descend and maintain flight level 600. Speedbird 007 heavy.
Okay, we've already hit Mach 2.03. Soon we will have to set it there. I have turned off the reheat afterburners. Let's see if the speed stabilizes to Mach 2 now. Looks like it doesn't. We need to reheat again. Let's get it back to Mach 1.05 or something, and then try to manage this. In this version, I see the turbulence mode is always on, so I'm going to turn that off and see if it fixes anything. Never saw this mode being on the previous version. Speed is still stagnant at 1.97. Okay, since we have the afterburners on, it's increasing now. Let's take a break and see what's going on with the passengers. If you don't know, you can also watch the speed and altitude from there, even in the real Concorde. They have a digital display for all passengers to see. Oh, nice bottles of champagne. Let's grab a glass and see if we can chill with the passengers. There we go. We rehear. You can see all the digital information that passengers see. Only thing we can't see now is the fuselage temperature, which we have to keep an eye always. Maybe our invisible engineer there in front will watch out for us. Okay, we're at 2.01 Mach. Max cruise is holding. Auto throttle and Mach hold doesn't seem to work well. We try again later and see if that issue changes. So with max cruise, it should hold around Mach 1.02 to 1.04. Let's sit for a bit here and keep an eye on the speed, and then we will head out to our cabin soon. Okay, speed is increasing. It should hold around 2.04 or so. When we get back to our seats, we will check the fuselage temperature outside and see how close it is to the limit. We will also check and see if the reheat is still on. We will try again to turn it off if it's not already off. Now we can do a couple more things. Switch the flight mode to cruise from climb using the 4 switches on the overhead panel. After that's done, we will also change the engine mode to from takeoff to flight. Time to check our external fuselage temperature of the plane. Looks like it's 126 degrees Celsius, getting close to the limit temperature. Like I said, this was not the case before this 2024 update. It used to sit at 112 to 115 degrees, so we might have to keep an eye on the speed. I think we're at Mach 2.05 and possibly have to bring it down. If the reheat is still on, we'll try to turn it off and see. We had to keep the reheat on, as last time we tried to turn it off, we dropped below Mach 2. Let's see if we can fix that. Okay, here we go. The alarm. Now this is the alarm I was talking about where sometimes you don't know why it's happening. In the previous version of this aircraft, you could take the speed all the way to Mach 1.12, and that's when you will hit the temperature limit. But in this it's limiting to Mach 1.05 or so, and the temperature reaches 127 already. So we have to slow down and and take quick measures. I just reduce speed by pulling back the throttle a bit. Let's try auto throttle and Mach hold this time and see if it works. Never had issues with this in the previous version. It's a problem now. Looks like none of the Mach hold or other buttons there even works. Can't push them in. Definitely a bug. Usually the only time you cannot push those buttons is when the auto throttle is off. But we can see clearly the auto throttle is on and still the Mach hold button won't push in or work. So for now we have to just manage speed manually. I just turned off auto throttle as it doesn't work, and I now put it back on max cruise. We drop speed to Mach 1.99, and let's get it back to 2 or above. Good thing temperature of the plane external has dropped to 117 degrees. So in general, it's wise to keep the speed at Mach 2.04 or less. One other thing I also want to mention is that in this version after the 2024 update, even if you're between 50,000 to 58,000 feet, and at Mach 2 or even closer, then the alarm might go off due to fuselage temperature rising. Not sure if that's the case with the real Concorde. I'm fairly sure they flew around 52 to 55,000 feet many times at Mach 2. Now what I'm checking is to be prepared for the descend point and decide where to descend. When it comes to Concorde, don't rely on the ATC. They will sometimes give you wrong instructions to descend too early or too late. So it's better to make our own judgments. Usually around 300 miles from destination would be good. If you think you're not able to achieve that, then prepare even at 350 to 400 miles. One option is to pull up the navlog and calculate the distance for descent. Just add up all the distance to the destination and roughly aim it at 300 to 350 miles and pick the waypoints where you can start descending. Hopefully ATC will also instruct us at the right descend point, but do not rely on them. We're almost past mid-flight point and still having speed issues due to the auto throttle bug. But hey, we just have to adapt. Either way, we achieved Mach 2 and 60,000 feet as planned. So based on my calculation, we should start descend between the waypoint BART and 35 N 30. That would be roughly 350 miles. Concorde is a hard beast to descend due to its aerodynamics, which is primarily designed for supersonic flight, which doesn't work well in subsonic speed. That's why there are no real flaps or air brakes. So unless we descend early, it's pretty much impossible to make it at the right altitude and right speed before the destination. That being said, you don't want to panic and start descending 600 to 800 miles away. That beats the whole purpose of flying a Concorde, and you're barely save 30 or 40% on the flight time. So plan efficiently. you have trouble understanding the navlog distance, which belongs to which, just look at the first entry, and you will know it's the distance to reach the first waypoint, and then you can figure things out. Let's check outside and see what's going on. Well, looks like it's all a blur. Nothing to see. Very hazy. No scenic views, and also we're over the Pacific Ocean. Okay, we're at the temperature problem again due to the speed. Speed is now Mach 1.05. So the issue is max cruise is not holding the speed. So we have to either manually reduce throttle a little bit and slash, or try again our auto throttle and Mach hold and see if it works. Okay, speed is good. 2.02 Mach. The fuselage temperature is dropping outside now at 120 degrees Celsius. By the way, I'm sorry, I had to cut off the engine and other audio due to the fact I accidentally left the mic on and all sorts of audio in my home got recorded. So we just have to finish the rest off without the engine noise and other ATC audio. I'll try my best to comment during the ATC critical points and other things. The important thing is the final descend and approach and catching the ILS right and auto land. Okay, we're now close to the descend point. It has gotten dark outside. The ATC has asked us to descend slightly before the point we were planning to descend. So all is good. I've set the altitude down to 40,000 and keep descending normally. Don't hit max climb on during descend. That will pitch the plane so steep you wouldn't be able to control the speed, and it will go way above the Mach limits, and you will crash. So just when asked to descend, just change the altitude and hit altitude acquire buttons. Keep an eye on the speed limiter. You don't want to reduce the speed a lot. Just bring it down slowly to Mach 1.5 above 40,000 feet, and then Mach 1 around 20,000, and from there we can do IS hold at 400 knots or so. Keep an eye on the airspeed limiter needle and don't get faster. Generally, as long as you don't descend too steep by setting max climb, you should be fine. Now we will proactively set the altitude to much lower, so we can be ahead of the ATC instructions, so we don't have to pay too much attention there. Also, at any point, if you face the autopilot is acting weird, which I have faced many times, just turn off the autopilot and the RAD/NAV toggle switch and turn it back on, and then activate the INS and altitude buttons again. It seemed to fix the issue. Later, I'll just remove all the extra video, trying to get to the approach and save some time, so we don't have to sit through here idly. By the way, you can turn off the auto throttle if you prefer and control the speed manually. You can see here we are well below the speed limit. The limiter needle will keep dropping down the more you descend. We should keep adjusting the speed. We are good. We're roughly about Mach 1.5 at around 40,000 feet. So anyways, keep descending and watch your speed, and I will see you guys closer to final and approach. Okay, we're approaching San Francisco. In a few minutes, we'll be at the approach soon. You can see that auto throttle is on and set at about 398 knots, max 400, and at about 7,000 feet now. In realistic Concorde situations, I think you're allowed to be only at 300 or 350 knots max at distances close to the destination. We will adjust speed to about 250 knots once we're closer. Concorde has several restrictions in altitude and sound due to its extremely loud profile, even at low speeds. I've cut some more content off, just to save us some time. So we're now close to approach and descend. It's normal with Concorde that sometimes in the VFR it might show it's a bit away from the navigation path. But that's normal. Based on the speed sometimes, it can veer off and take a wide turn. We will start descending at HEMAN waypoint. That's about 10.1 miles from the runway and best to catch the glide slope. It's best to catch the glide slope from below at around 3,000 to 3,100 feet, which is the approach altitude for the runway. You've also noticed that we have slowed down to about 250 knots. Concorde might behave a bit weird if you're sometimes flying too long below 220 knots. It could be a bug. Many people, including me, has lost control and crashed at that speeds, and even it will just stall and go off the navigation path. So keep the speeds at 220 knots or higher, and then only closer to approach points bring the speed down to 200 knots, and once the glide slope and auto land is active, reduce speed to 195 knots. Concorde has full auto landing capabilities, so there is no need to turn off auto throttle or autopilot. The moments after the plane touches down, the auto throttle will shut off and autopilot functions will be off. Now we're descending to be around 3,000 feet, and then reduce speed to 220 knots. You will hear a long beep noise sometimes, and after this 2024 update, it's due to key altitude change points at lower altitudes, and also when you bring down the nose. So we will also bring the landing gear and nose down. One other thing I forgot to mention is, you do not have to flare Concorde. The reason is because Concorde, when it's landing, it is already pitched so high it always lands on its rear landing gear, and sometimes might even hit the tail. That's the reason why Concorde even has a tail gear/wheel to make sure to prevent damage to the tail. Okay, we're turning perfectly. We're about 12 miles from the airport. Due to the altitude bug, we have to play around with the altitude hold and acquire buttons to get the altitude right. Now before you hit the approach button, make sure you are aligned almost straight to the runway. We're at good altitude to catch it. Although it's a bit dark, hard to see anything outside, we will just rely on the lights from the runway to just make sure all is good. Even with auto land, it's a good idea to ready to take control. As I have noticed sometimes, due to bugs just before the runway, the plane might be a little off, sometimes even way off at 2,000 feet or so. If you check carefully, you'll get an idea. Okay, I'm reducing speed to about 200 knots now and enable approach after. Once you click the approach button on the autopilot panel, the auto land will come on and also the auto land light in front of you. Okay, Watch the altitude now. It looks like it has caught the glide slope perfectly. It's descending. Ignore the red too fast sign here. I only left this guidance for tutorial purposes. But also it's good to show this is a bug after this 2024 update, that even at 195 knot landing speeds, the guidance will still show too fast. So ignore it. It's a bug. Okay, looks like a problem with the auto throttle. The speed is not right. We have to reduce manually. We might have to shut off auto throttle again. Make sure your speed is not above 200 knots at this point. We forgot to pay attention. Again, this is only one person flying instead of the co-pilot and the flight engineer. So we're forgiven. But we should be okay before we touch down. I'm going to turn off auto throttle and adjust speed down a bit more, just to be safe. Like I said, even at 195 knots, you will see this too fast warning. It's a problem. Just ignore. I know I'm currently above the landing speed, but if you fly, you will see this too fast warning, even at correct landing speeds. Okay, that was a bit of rough landing. Not ideal. We were 5 knots higher. But that's okay. We didn't crash. And I'm in realistic setup. I have base shakers or transducers on my seat here at home, and I felt the landing, it wasn't too crazy. Just a little bumpy. Finally, we arrived. Now you can apply reverse thrust and brakes and come to a stop. You have noticed I didn't do all the landing procedures and lights, etc., but that's easy to figure out. Key things are autopilot, auto land, and speeds. Okay, let's ask taxi to gates and get there. Okay, all set. Turn on parking brakes. We have a problem with the ATC. We don't see any communications. This is sometimes common and happens with the plane. Again, a bug. Now we can turn off engines, which are the 4 black switches on the overhead panel for fuel cutoff. Then turn off the battery, which is on the right side behind the co-pilot all the way at the bottom end of the engineer's panel. Okay, thanks again for patiently watching through. See you guys again in a different video. Most likely, the Lockheed Martin Dark Star State Route 72 at Mach 10. Check out my other videos for the ANF and 225 and also the landing of the Spruce Goose.